And this is why I don't rate books 1 star. Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are doing a spoiler talk on our Book of the Month poll winner, The Last Word. If you missed the poll, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can vote on which book I am reading next month. This is one I had on my want to read on Goodreads for a while before it even dropped as a pick on Book of the Month. So I was pretty pumped about this. The book is about Emma, who gives a negative review on a murder book, and then she starts getting threatened by the author of this shitty book that she trashed. I liked this premise because we've all seen those like 1-star reviews that absolutely hate on books. And so it just felt like a freaky premise where it's like, ugh, like you don't know who's reading those reviews. So before we dive into the spoilers, just a basic review. I found this book to be predictable, which was a bummer for me. Overall, it was an entertaining read, but everything just felt so obvious. Throughout reading, I was making guesses and I was thinking, there's no way that I'm going to be right because my guesses felt too obvious. And then they ended up being right. So while I didn't think it was a waste of time to read, it was well written, and like I said, I love the premise. I just wasn't amazed by the twists and turns because I guessed them all. So if you don't want anything spoiled for this book, bye. We'll see you after you read it. But if you do, let's go. So our main character, Emma, is house sitting for this woman that she's never met before. Her name is Jules, and she owns a house on Strand Beach in Washington. Emma doesn't have a job. She's in the grieving process from losing her husband 5 months previous. She spends all day with her dog, and she spends all day reading these cheap, crappy murder mystery ebooks. She also plays hangman with her elderly retired writer neighbor Deke by way of writing on whiteboards and using telescopes to see what the words are to guess, which I'm not sure how this game started. Like, was she spying on him? Was he spying on her? Who's to know? But I found it weird right away. So this book is divided up by the prologue and then 4 parts. In the prologue, Emma has read this shitty book and she's left her review, which, by the way, Emma left the one and only review on this book, which is so awkward. Initially, I had so many questions, like how long has this book been published? And nobody has written a review. Or have people written reviews and the author asked them to take them down and people actually did, unlike Emma. Also, keep in mind her neighbor is the one who told her to read this book. We learn later that he tells her that he meant it as a joke, but just keep in mind how weird it is that Deke would tell her to read this book. After she leaves her review, the author gets all pissy. He commands her to take the review down, and she responds back and forth with him, being like, no. And then in the first few chapters, Emma's having some like paranoia, but we also learn that this isn't a completely new trait for her. She's experienced these feelings a lot throughout her life prior, apparently. So as the reader, I was like, this whole book is going to be basically nothing happening with her being paranoid the whole book, and then it ending up just being nothing. Which, that was my one prediction that I was incorrect about. The rest, I'm right. So she thinks there is someone who's been watching her sleep and that they're hiding in the house, but at the same time she's like uncertain if maybe the house is just haunted, and that's what she's like imagining. So she's placing like sand in front of the windows and doors to see if anybody is entering the house. There's floodlights around the house that keep going off. Her dog that's with her keeps getting all freaked out at like random intervals. And this is a house on the beach and it's winter, so practically everything around them is just abandoned. Then she gets told by the house's owner, Jules, that Jules was looking at her like Ring doorbell, and she saw some guy in a demon mask outside the viewpoint of the like peephole so that Emma couldn't see them. And that night previously, Emma thought that there was someone out there because her dog was freaking out. And so at this point, I was like, wait, things are actually happening. And I was reading this alone at night in my bed. So it's dark and I'm reading this and I'm like, I don't like fucking around with this like creepy ass shit. Like I was getting a little weirded out and I started becoming a little bit paranoid. So it did a good job of making me be like, what was that? I started being like, wait, things are actually happening in this book instead of her just being kind of weirded out and paranoid. So it started getting a little bit like much for me when I was reading it. I was like, oh, maybe this isn't a book that I read late at night in the dark. Then I went through this spiral of being like, Jules' son is the creepo author. She's texting back and forth with Jules, and Jules mentions that her son had been watching her house previously and that he got really like freaked out by the isolation. He felt like somebody was watching him through the windows, crouched in the tall grass. I just thought it was very peculiar that she would mention her son and that he had previously always watched the house, but now he won't watch the house, and now she had to hire some rando to watch her house. I just thought that was very interesting. And then part 1 ends with this creepo author showing up on her doorstep, impersonating her neighbor, Deke, trying to get her to open the door, which I don't know how she knew it wasn't Deke since she's never met him in person and she doesn't know what his voice sounds like. But at the same time, the person was like covering the peephole so that she couldn't see them, which obviously was sus. So I don't know if she's like, that's not something like a well-intentioned neighbor would do. But also keep in mind, how would this random author know the name of Emma's neighbor? So Emma's like, you aren't Deke, I'm not opening the door. And the author was like disguising his voice. He starts talking normal and he starts reading her review to her that she had written about his book. He printed it out and he's super pissy and he's like, you're gonna be the star of my next novel, Murder Beach. I was like, what's happening? So leading into part 2, I was so surprised that the author made such an abrupt entrance into this novel. I was not expecting him to legit show up 85 pages in and straight be like, I'ma kill you, bitch. And I was like, whoa, that took a turn. I just went into it expecting the whole novel to be her just being super paranoid the whole time. But this guy actually shows up and is like, nee, 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 nee. So she looked in his past like book history. He had written 16 murder novels and she's like, oh, so all those novels you wrote were real? Cool. Starting in part 2, the book starts cutting between a draft of the manuscript of Murder Beach and also resumes Emma's side of the story. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but Emma said that the author sucked at writing and ooh, buddy, reading those manuscript parts was like pulling teeth for me. It was pretty rough. Mainly, I was distracted by his horrible diet that he kept describing. He had like 6 burgers on the road, and then for dinner, he had 2 orders of a calamari appetizer, 4 fish fillets and oysters and fries and 2 beers. My dude, I was so appalled. I could not stop being distracted by those food choices. The author of this book did a really good job of making the book author seem like a complete creepo. The real author was giving this fake author literally all of the worst traits you could think of. He was a fedora tipper, he had a trench coat, he was a sword user, he was an eater of disgusting food, and his vape flavor of choice was butter. I can't even. It felt like such a parody. The whole time, I just could not stop thinking that it was so obvious that this Chucky guy was Jules's son. And I even made a note at page 135 that I was going to be so disappointed if it was actually him because it just felt so obvious. It's like he's evaporated, and in the growing silence, something else arises to the surface of her mind. The intruder's smell, that strange and oily odor that radiated off of him in the kitchen. She is certain she smelled the same odor in the house before, ever since she first arrived on the Strand, weeks before she one-starred Murder Mountain, weeks before she summoned H.G. Kane to this isolated coast. It's impossible. She can't trust her own memory. She can't trust time. In part 2, things start to move really quickly. Chucky, his name isn't actually Chucky, but I'm just gonna call him that because the author kept referencing him looking like Chucky constantly. So Chucky makes his intentions right off the bat, very, very obvious. Emma's going to die. He's been stalking her ever since she left her review, so he's prepared. He's blocked the Wi-Fi of the house and cell service. He cuts everyone's phone lines. He's really committed to ensuring that Emma can't get help. Reading this section was kind of strange. I liked the way the author did the narrative in this section, like cutting between the two, but it felt like everything was just getting revealed so quickly. So I was thinking there was going to be another twist coming at the end that would like blow me away. There are some twists coming up, but I wasn't blown away by them. A couple of things to note. The killer knows the house way too much, like he's way too comfortable in his surroundings. Again, why I was so convinced that he was Jules's son. Also, everyone in the reviews on Goodreads were talking about, don't worry, the dog lives. And I was like, before I read it, I was like, fuck, why are people saying that? And it's because Chucky keeps trying to poison the freaking dog. I was like, bro, can we not? Chucky's trying to get in the house. He's trying to get to Emma to kill her. Like, he broke through these like storm tough windows with his sword. That's his weapon of choice that he's using in this book. He's obsessed with katana swords. He just keeps getting cooler and cooler. So he fucking slams through a window, shatters it. Emma was hiding in the kitchen and then she escaped. She went upstairs and they had this big scene that I felt like was too much. Randomly, this FedEx driver came to the house to drop off a package. Then Chucky just freaking chops him up with his sword. I didn't understand why this section was here. Jules had ordered Emma a stun gun for protection, so that's why the FedEx driver was there. But at the same time, I was like, do we really have to have this scene about this like Chucky-ass motherfucker just chopping up a FedEx delivery driver? I did not feel like that was necessary. It was all a bit bonkers, to be honest. And I think that was a little deliberate. Emma had described that the book she read about the two college girls that were killed was also bonkers. Like, things happened in the book that just felt unrealistic, and now that's what felt like what was happening in Emma's story. It's still the same night. We're only about an hour into Chucky being here. Deke had been watching out his window. He saw the FedEx driver get all chopped up, and he tries to call for help. His phone line is also cut. The killer is now outside of the house, even though there's this huge gaping hole in the window. She covered it with a couch so that he couldn't get back in. So he's circling the house looking for another way to get into the house. And Emma and Deke are writing back and forth to each other with their whiteboards, trying to like find out where he is. And then Deke sees the killer and is like, my God, I know him. He's that shitty author. He was basically stalking me there for a bit, trying to get me to read his shitty books. Because Deke is an author and this guy idolized him, and Deke was like, he wouldn't leave me alone. Which is also so peculiar that he would just see him out the window and be like, I know him. Now, the remainder of part 2 is just a cat and a mouse game, which I really was rooting for Emma. I really wanted her to win. So we get to this part where she has him follow her down into the basement because she knows that the rafters are low, so he can't swing his sword to hit her. And then this is another moment where he goes down into the basement. He knows exactly where to step to not make noise. And then he magically knows exactly where the light switch was in this weird placed spot to turn on the lights. How interesting that he knew exactly where everything was. Well, she was down there waiting for him to turn the light on, and she smashed his hand with a hammer. So I actually did like that part. I thought that was good. You know, she got a hidden, so I was like, go girl. So she runs back up the stairs, goes to a dark corner, has a weapon of a screwdriver. So she's waiting for Chucky to come around the corner so that she can, you know, fuck him up with a screwdriver. And she does have a direct hit with her weapon, but of course it's Deke who came over to try and save her, and she just which that really did end up surprising me. I was like, oh, you're just stabbing your neighbor now. Going into part 3, we're practically 60% into the book now, and I had no idea how I felt. This novel was not going the way I was expecting it to. I thought it would be more of a psychological thriller and not these like action scenes where like people are legitimately dying and like kind of violent. Plus, during these violent scenes, I could not stop thinking about how has Chucky not been caught after all of these real murders that he's supposedly committed? He isn't exactly being swift in leaving minimal evidence. He just makes me think of this like classic bull in a china shop where he's just sloppy as fuck. So Deke's bleeding out from his screwdriver wound. Emma patches him up with packing tape, which I don't feel like that's how it works, but okay. And then there's a knock at the door. The police have shown up for a wellness check, and Chucky is like, get rid of them or I'll kill Deke. So part 3 is about 60 pages, and a good 20 pages of that is Emma talking to the cops at the door and then being like, you okay? And her being like, yeah, totally. Which, by the way, did you not notice this woman is extremely probably disheveled? Are you not seeing that she's probably not okay? And then, of course, the real author of the book had described how Chucky had moved the dismantled FedEx driver's body into the bushes, and it was also raining that night, so that washed away all of the blood from that driveway massacre. So, you know, happy coincidences. Then Jules randomly shows up. Apparently she was the one who had called the cops to do a wellness check because Emma wasn't answering her phone, and so she was worried. She assures them all, I'm good. So the cops leave, Jules stays back. Emma mouths to her the name of the intruder that's holding her hostage. Well, dear reader, could I just ask you, if you were in this situation, why, when you are mouthing to someone that you need help because you're being held hostage, why would you lead by saying the intruder's first, middle, and last name? I knew immediately when she did that the author did it specifically for the plot, because my prediction from the very beginning was right. Chucky is Jules' son. Obviously. So this hasn't actually been revealed to the reader yet. Emma tells Jules the name of this person and is like, intruder, hostage. And so Emma assumes that Jules is going to tell the police and they're going to come back and save them. But, you know, in Jules' mind, she's like, my darling son. So they all leave. She goes back in the house. And then we have this extreme cringe section. I can't even. I felt like this was so awkward and uncomfortable. So Chucky starts describing himself as a Sigma male, and Lord, I was just thinking, Emma cannot let this fucker win. So he literally is just like you, Emma, I don't have a pack. A Sigma male is a true lone wolf. He punches the wall, leaving a splintered crater. No, please! Red-faced, he grasps his temples and digs his fingernails into doughy skin like he's arguing with a voice she can't hear. So he's having a meltdown about this whole night not going the way that he had planned it to. Emma's like, I don't understand. You've done this 16 times. Your 16 other novels, all those people that you've killed. And he's like, they're fiction. And she's like, really? And he's like, come on, Emma. A serial killer who writes books about the people he murders, that would just be stupid. I love how he's like, idiot. Of course I've never killed anybody. Oh, except he has. He does say, so before in his manuscript, he says that the first person that he's ever killed was his high school crush, Laura. He kidnapped her, tied her up in his basement, and then he went to school that day, and then she fell over in the chair and suffocated because he tied the knots too tight. And then he dismantled her body with his sword. How he got away with that, I do not know. So this is bonkers. He starts talking about how he's been watching her. Being close to you was nice while it lasted. He smiles and straightens his fedora. He's still wearing the fedora. After all of these action scenes, he still has the frickin' fedora on. Come on. Whew. I like the way you make the house smell, Emma. I like the way you talk to your dog as if she could talk back. I liked how you'd sit and read for hours every day with your ginger tea and play whiteboard games with your neighbor. I liked your petite body. You were my kind of girl, you know? You were Solitary's quiet, smart, introspective. Not like all of the other femoids. You reminded me of Laura in so many little ways. Revulsion climbs up her throat like a swarming mass of cold maggots. She feels a visceral tug in her stomach and wants to puke. My kind of girl. Literally, girl, I feel you. I would want to vomit too. And then you wrote that review, he sniffs, and you broke my heart. You're trapped in your past, Emma. You love that dog too much. You have to learn to let go of things before they drown you. So here's my proposal. I'll spare your life if you come with me right now. We'll live on the road together, you and me. I have over $120,000 in my bank account. We'll drive south to Mexico, maybe. I can save you, Emma. I'm the only one who can save you from yourself. You understand that, right? You're broken and you can't recover from this grief alone. You're not strong enough, so come with me and be my girl. Bro. That took such a turn for me. That's the thing. I did predict things about this novel, but there were other things that happened where I was like, is this happening right now? Like, this is one of the cringiest things I feel like I've ever read. So after Chucky's love proposal, Deke pops up with apparently his wound was not fatal. So he has his gun. He points it at Chucky, and this is when Mama Jules comes in and Chucky's like, Mom! Which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, his real name is actually Howard, but I can't stop thinking of him as Chucky since the author referred to him as a Chucky doll like multiple times. Also, quick side note about Deke, by the way, this is going to get revealed in part 4, but I want to talk about it now because the author of the book kept inserting so many little hints about Deke and Emma's suspicions about him being involved in this whole thing somehow. Well, in part 4, it comes out that he did orchestrate all of this. And at the reveal in part 4, I was like, it made sense where I was like, well, yeah, why would you have all of these hints about him being involved if it turned out that he like wasn't involved? It just felt a little like too on the nose. This is after the mother comes in. Emma has a bad feeling about everything. Something else bothers her. Now that she's had a moment to think about it, what are the odds that she'd read a shitty book that just so happened to be written by a psychopath who grew up in this very house out of the hundreds of thousands, no, millions of books in the world? Another coincidence, another dark layer to this room. No one is safe. So quickly finishing up part 3, Jules comes in and is like, my darling son, what are you doing? And she, of course, did not alert the police of the intruder because Emma told her the name of the intruder. So then Jules knew it was her bouncing baby boy. So Jules is all, don't hurt him. He's mentally ill. He has a schizoaffective disorder. Please don't hurt him. Then there ends up being this standoff with Deke pointing the gun at him. So then they all agree that Emma will drive and go get the police, and Jules, Deke, and Chucky will stay at the house because Jules wants to make sure that Deke doesn't shoot her kid. Now, finishing up this part, like, rapidly, the following happens. Chucky lunges at Emma to strangle her. Deke shoots and misses. Emma runs to go get her dog to escape. Chucky attacks Deke. It's implied that Deke's dead, but again, he's not because he makes an appearance in part 4, as I've already mentioned. Chucky then, very specifically, which I'm so like, what? hog ties up his mother to get her out of the way so that he can go attack Emma. So then Emma gets outside, gets in the FedEx truck to escape. Chucky runs outside. He gets hit by the van, but somehow he's still kicking. Then Chucky thinks that she got away and that she's going to the cops. Chucky then finds her dog. The dog didn't make it into the car with her. And he decides he's going to kill the dog. When Emma shows back up, she apparently never intended to go to the police. She just drove down the road, opened up the stun gun that Jules had ordered for her, that the poor delivery driver was there to deliver in the first place. She goes back to the beach house to get her dog. She stun guns Chucky. He shoots her in the leg. She goes and gets a sword from his childhood bedroom, stabs him in the chest. Somehow he's still alive after all of that, and then she shoots him in the face. I was like, what? After the death of Chucky, Emma goes to the hospital, does all the, all the stuff with the police. She makes a full recovery. Then, part 4, she goes to visit Strand Beach one last time. Which I'm literally like, why are we going here to reminisce? Like, if this were me, I'd be like, I'm never going to Strand Beach ever again. I'm getting the fuck out of here. No. We learn that Deke also survived this whole altercation, and he is writing a book about the whole experience, and he's now set to do quite well with this book deal. This is like his comeback, because before he had written a book about a famous serial killer, and that made him really famous. Well, his fame has teetered out, and now he's making his comeback with another like true crime type book. This is the reveal that I had mentioned earlier. Deke and Emma are spending time together, they're having some tea, they're talking about everything. Out of nowhere, Deke tells Emma that he has to kill her. So earlier when they were during their standoff, Emma told Deke that she had suspected him being in on the whole thing the whole time, and he actually was. So now that he knows that she suspected that, he can't let her live and have her figure it out and tell the police about it. The whole time he had intended on Chucky killing Emma, because that would make the true crime aspect of his book more intriguing. Also, turns out that this manuscript that we've been reading throughout this book was actually Deke's book that he had been writing the whole time, which I did like that. I liked that it was like revealed that he had been planning this book the whole time. I had a feeling that he was involved, but I couldn't quite figure out like how or why. I actually did like that twist. But I had just wished that Emma would have been more in the dark about the twist. She kept saying throughout the whole book over and over and over again that she didn't trust him. So as the reader, I never trusted him either. So then when this was revealed, I just wasn't shocked. I was like, well, yeah, you've been telling us not to trust him this whole time. So apparently before she even read the book, Deke had somehow convinced Howard to stalk her and kill her. But then Howard, after watching her for weeks in the house, developed a crush on her, which is why we had that big love confession. So then he decided he didn't want to kill her. So Deke did the whole plan with her reading the book and then posting the review, so then she hurt Howard's feelings with the review, and then that caused him to want to kill her. I'm like, wow, so it really worked out that she hated the book and that she wrote the 1-star review and actually posted it. I'm just literally thinking about like, what if she like read the book and loved it? And then Howard's like, oh, love connection. Now that Deke has revealed everything to her, he wants to kill her and make it seem like a suicide because he doesn't want her in the future to figure out his part in this and go to the police. It just felt like this book was like never ending. Like you think that she's going to get away from Deke because she had her taser and she tased him, but then she finds out that Deke is ahead of her and he had poisoned her tea to like disable her. She tries to throw up the tea up, but she still has too much of it in her system. He then takes her backpack filled with rocks, ties it to her, and then puts her in the water to drown. She's basically super lethargic because of the poison. You're like, okay. And so he calls the police to do a wellness check on her. And he's like, oh, I'm so worried about my neighbor. I think she's gonna kill herself. And the police are like, what's her name? And they're like, oh, Emma, she's fine. She's here. She's here right now. So it turns out in the water, she got out of the backpack and she had thrown up enough of the poison that she was fine. And then she walked 11 miles to the police station to tell them everything. Deke learns this on the phone, and then he just ends up killing himself. It just felt so unsatisfactory to have him just kind of end it for himself and not have to like face justice for anything that he did. I was just like, oh, okay. So then it was just over. Now, just a side note, I didn't get into Emma's whole thing with her and her husband in her past, just because to me, it all felt like such an afterthought of the novel. So in the beginning, it was implied that she was a widow, but really she was just estranged from her husband after a car accident that where she was driving and her infant daughter was killed. So she was dealing with this immense grief throughout the whole book, but it was because of her daughter and not because we assumed her husband died, but really it was her daughter that died. So in the end, the book ends with her and her husband reuniting. Happy ending for Emma. I cannot figure out how I feel about this one. On one hand, I felt sad for Howard because yes, the whole time he was trying to kill Emma and he killed other people, but at the same time he was mentally ill and he was being manipulated by Deke. But that also doesn't change the fact that he had killed one of his classmates when he was in high school. So I can't feel that bad for him, obviously. So I was just like all over the place with not knowing how I should feel after finishing this book. And then also in the end, I just had so many questions that were unresolved about the story. Like, for example, Deke had planned this whole thing, but did he plan it after observing Emma for a while and decided she's the one? Or was he going to do this whole plan with anybody who ended up being the house sitter? Like, where did this idea even come from? And obviously at the beginning I was like, oh, how did this whiteboard and telescope game start? Obviously it started from Deke watching her, the big creep. I do feel like the biggest thing I got out of this novel was don't house sit for a random person from the internet that you don't know, which I'm already big on that. I mean, I won't even stay in Airbnbs because I don't trust them, but really, be smart, stay safe, listen to your gut. So that is it for today, guys. Like I said, I have no idea on whether or not I liked this book or didn't like this book. I did like the twists, but at the same time, I didn't like how easy it was for me to predict the twists that were coming. I'm very curious if you liked this book, if you didn't like this book, what are your thoughts? But thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next time. Bye.